I'm a huge fan of the filmmaker Bong Joon-ho. Between movies like the Oscar-winning Parasite, Memories of Murder, Mother, Barking Dogs Never Bite, and others, he really has been this kind of tip of the spear when it comes to filmmakers that have emerged out of the current South Korean cinematic renaissance that has been occurring over the last 20 years, along with filmmakers like Lee Chang-dong and Hong Sang-soo, and my personal favorite, Park Chan-wook, who also has a movie coming out later this year, I believe, last I checked. But Bong has a movie hitting our shores in the next couple weeks, one starring Robert Pattinson and Mark Ruffalo and others, and it's entitled Mickey 17. And it's based upon a book by the author Edward Ashton called Mickey 7. So I thought it would be a good idea, also to help the channel a little bit, to talk about Mickey 7 just a bit. And kind of dive in and find out what this book's all about ahead of the film, which I'll have a review of over at screenrex.com in the coming weeks. So keep a lookout for that. But in the meantime, let's talk about Mickey 7, the book, instead of Mickey 17, the movie. And we'll start by talking about the plot. Mickey Barnes works as an expendable on an ice planet colony, the person they send on missions too dangerous for anyone they can't replace. When Mickey dies, they just print a new body and load his memories into it. Simple, efficient, and it's worked fine through 6 deaths so far. But when Mickey barely survives his latest deadly mission, he returns to the colony to find something impossible. They've already printed Mickey 8 to replace him. Now there are 2 Mickeys, each with the same memories but quickly becoming different people. They need to figure out how to survive on a brutal ice planet while keeping their situation secret from the colonial authorities who would never allow 2 versions of the same expendable to exist. I don't read a lot of newer science fiction, and that's not really any sort of mark against what's currently on the shelves. I just have been prioritizing more foundational texts. There's a lot of things from the 50s and 60s and up to the present day that I just haven't read that I think have made such a mark on the genre that I feel like I should spend my time there rather than the things that are like kind of burning up the New York Times bestseller list. But every once in a while, you get pulled in, and I will say, I enjoyed Mickey 7 quite a bit. I was surprised. I thought I would probably struggle to get into it, but it's a really easy breezy book to read. What's kind of cool and was the initial observation I had upon reading this book is that Ashton's style is very Phil Dickian, which I guess is a cute term to try to compare him to Philip K. Dick. But there's a couple of ways in which that's true. One, Mickey 7 is one of these books where there's like a concept piled on top of another concept, piled on top of another concept, piled on top of another concept. Kind of like earlier Dick books are, like The Solar Lottery or Eye in the Sky or something like that, where you'll have ideas like this cloning thing that sits at the center of the book's narrative, and then you'll have the colonization of worlds. Then you'll have first contact narrative. Then you'll have this religion that is against cloning, and this like really sort of fully formed world. You can see like there were a lot of different ideas that went into the book, but Ashton does such a good job smoothing it all out that it does feel like a cohesive whole, which I really appreciated. The other element that I think is very similar to Dick's approach is that Mickey is a blue-collar guy. He is the first-person perspective of the entire book. We never break from that perspective, so everything is seen through his eyes. And because of that, he's a guy who has a background in history. He's not a science leader. He's not some sort of expert in anything. He's not a scientist. He's not an entrepreneur. He's none of those things. He's just a regular guy who has a string of bad luck, and he ends up taking a really crappy job on a ship that is headed towards a world that's going to be colonized, and he's the guy that's got to do all the really crappy suicidal work that sort of feeds the majority of the narrative. And because we're seeing everything through his eyes, it's really similar to how Dick would handle this kind of stuff through the eyes of someone like Deckard in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, or the protagonist of A Scanner Darkly, or other works kind of similar to that. Like, it's just a ground level perspective on something that's pretty fantastical. There's also this shared skepticism towards corporate power that both authors employ, and I think becomes kind of a centralized focus of Ashton's narrative specifically, in that Mickey has his literal body has become commodified by his employer, who uses him again as a sacrificial lamb constantly and consistently. Even in comparison to Dick, I think Ashton's easier to read. There's a page-turning quality that I think is a little addictive, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, especially when you're dealing with a book that has a lot of things on its mind, and we'll talk about those themes in a second. But I was constantly drawn to the book. There was never really a point that I found myself terribly bored. I do feel like there are some limits to Ashton's approach that I think undercuts a lot of the thematic weight of the work, but it was fun to read, and I don't think that should be discounted. The book itself really moves at a clip that's so quick, though. I will admit, it does kind of shortchange its ability to ruminate on a lot of the things that should be dived deeper into. There's this constant pattern in the book where something will be discussed, will be undercut by a quip, and then we'll move on to the next thing because a big event has just happened and it's time to talk about something else. I think that's probably the one big flaw of the narrative, along with like the limiting first-person POV that is really only in Mickey's sardonic viewpoint, so we never really understand the full scope of the world. But all the same, I still enjoyed it, and I still had a good time reading it, even with those complaints. The central philosophical question of Mickey 7 is that Ship of Theseus quandary, which itself is presented in the book actually in a really funny way the second time it comes up. But it's this idea of, if you replace every piece of something slowly but surely, is it still the same thing it was at the beginning? And as Mickey is someone who has died and been replaced multiple times, there's this ongoing question of whether he is the same Mickey he always was or is not. I don't think the book really answers that question necessarily, but it does at least pose it. And I think that leaves readers with something to chew on. The relationship between Mickey 7 and Mickey 8 is really the heart of the story. You have the clone who was supposed to die and the clone that was supposed to replace them, but neither thing really worked out according to plan, and now they exist at the same time. And it opens up interesting questions about whether if the exact same person is really the exact same, or whether they have free will that determines their ability to differentiate between one another. And that presents itself in really cool ways throughout the book. It's the question of what makes you, you, when an exact copy exists. And if that copy is making different choices, what does that say? The other thing I really liked about Ashton's approach is the way he structured his info dumps throughout. You would have a chapter that kind of talks about the current happenings between Mickey 7 and Mickey 8 and their relationship with Nasha, who is Mickey's girlfriend, whichever Mickey that is. Mickey 7, I guess, but really it's more complicated than that. And then you would have a chapter that fills in the gaps between what happened between Mickey 1 and Mickey 7. Like, how did Mickey get into the program? One of the early chapters describes that. How did Mickey become Mickey 2 or Mickey 3 or Mickey 4? We learn about those deaths that lead to the eventual cloning process that gets to Mickey 7. And then in those intervening chapters, by the time we catch up to the present day, that's when Ashton takes the opportunity to also fill the reader in on the world itself. Like, why can two clones not exist at the same time? And why is humanity trying to colonize all of these different worlds? And what is the technology that drives it? And what have the colonial experiences been like in the past? What have the failed colonies looked like? Ashton answers a lot of these questions in really, really neat ways. And as much as I liked the present day story, which I enjoyed, I thought it was a good romp, it was the informational dumps where Mickey was researching previous colonies and a lot of the past history that I found actually very riveting. There's two major themes that emerge with pretty significant resonance throughout the book. The first is right up front, and that's the idea of expendability in capitalism. Mickey is treated as an expendable, as the ultimate commodification of human life. If there is a flesh-eating virus out in this atmosphere that the colony is trying to investigate, Mickey's the first guy who has to go out over and over and over again until they find a way to be able to safely venture out for the rest of the colony. Or if there's a cave full of carnivorous monsters, Mickey's the guy who has to investigate it and will probably die over and over and over again. He's literally a resource that exists to be consumed and replaced. He works for a company that, there's a scene in the book where an executive states that the Expendables program is more economical than instituting better safety measures. I think is a dark reflection of the way corporations are currently trying to claw back safety measures for everyday workers in America right now. Mickey's growing resistance to this categorization, though, is what drives so much of his character development. He moves from resigned acceptance to questioning the fundamental ethics of the system. There's also a theme around colonial ethics that I think is pretty chilling, especially towards the end when there's discussion of potential genocide of a native alien race that this colony that Mickey is a part of is attempting to sort of take over. And for some readers, I think they'll see some pretty interesting parallels to some real world issues that we're facing today, that are in the news and kind of in our face consistently and constantly, I'm sad to say. But the ethical quandary between the domination and colonization of worlds that are not our own and the desperation of humanity, I think lends itself to a pretty complex set of questions that I think enriches the work and makes it just a little stronger. As I said before, if I had a complaint, it would be centered on the fact that we never really escape Mickey Seven's perspective, which I do think is limiting. There are some decisions made by characters that are very pivotal to the plot that we never really get a chance to explore. I'd like to learn more about Mickey 8 and his point of view. I would like to have learned more about what was going on inside Nasha, their love interest's head. I'd like to learn more about Kat, the security officer who also gets involved with Mickey. Even Marshall, the head of the mission, that would have been kind of interesting to sort of dive into a little bit. So it's a little limiting when we're stuck with Mickey the entire time, but it also keeps the book humming at a pretty quick pace, which I'm sure was Ashton's intent. The other thing that I wish he had explored just a little more was the mental strain of dying constantly. The thing is, the way cloning works in this book is that they upload their final moments into a system, so their memories carry over and over and over and over again. So Mickey retains a lot of the memories of his deaths, but they don't seem to impact him all that much, other than sort of driving his eventual resistance against his employers, but it doesn't really impact him mentally in any way. And I feel like that would not be the case. I feel like if you saw your own death over and over again, you would probably have it would have some impact on you as a person. And I guess that's just a different book altogether. But in all, it's a really good book. I really liked it. And I think the world building is really cool. I think the writing is really fun and breezy to read. It makes for like a good sort of bit of escapism. Every once in a while, a little popcorn that's thoughtful is a-okay to me. So I'm gonna give this one 4 stars. And, let me know if you've read it. I would love to get your thoughts or what you think about the movie that's coming up, if you've seen the trailer, and if you're excited for that. I will say I'm a little concerned. The trailer has like kind of this farcical approach that reminds me a little bit of some of Bong's weaker movies, but I'm hoping that's just the way they're selling it and that it's not really a reflection of the film at all. I did notice that the title is different, so it means that there's going to be more deaths for poor Mickey. So I guess I'm looking forward to seeing how those take shape on the big screen. Anyway, we'll be back next week. As always, remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll be back next week. Keep on reading.